There is a number attached to every person in this city, a price, a value, an expiration date. Junho knew Kaya's number, and he just miscalculated badly. The night he handed her name to a debt collector in exchange for a corner office, Kaya didn't cry. She didn't beg. She simply accepted the invitation she had never expected, from the one man in South Korea that nobody refuses. 6 months later, Kaya walked into Junho's biggest night, not as his shadow, not as his secret, but on the arm of Chairman Kang, the Dongbanja, the partner of the Seoul underworld. And Junho realized the building wasn't the only thing about to collapse. If someone just watched that and didn't hit subscribe, Kaya would like a word with them. This story is just getting started. And the people already here? They're going to see everything Junho was too blind to protect. Kaya had spent 14 months on the Xinhua Tower. 14 months of missed weekends, cold coffee, and conversations she had with herself at 2 a.m. when the city outside her window had finally gone quiet and Junho still wasn't home. 14 months of pouring everything she had, her training, her instinct, the particular intelligence she had inherited from a grandmother who could read land the way other people read faces, into a project that was going to make another person's name. She had known this. She had done it anyway. That was the part she would have to sit with later. The Xinhua Tower was 47 floors of mixed commercial and residential space, anchored by a structural core she had redesigned 3 times before she found the solution that actually satisfied her. Not the one that met code, not the one that met budget, but the one that was correct, the one that would still be standing when everyone involved in building it was gone. She had given it her American technical training, her Nigerian instinct for scale, her hard-won understanding of how Seoul specifically moves and settles and breathes. She had given it everything she had. On a Thursday evening in October, she rolled the final drawings into their tube, carried them down the corridor to Junho's office, and placed them on his desk. He looked at the tube, then at her, then back at the tube, and he smiled the smile she remembered from Chicago, from the lecture hall where he had borrowed her pencil and turned it in his fingers, and later told her it was the most beautiful pencil he had ever seen, which was obviously not true. It was a standard 0.5 mechanical, but she had laughed anyway because he had meant something else entirely. He told her to dress nicely, that they were celebrating. She went home and stood in front of the wardrobe longer than she would ever admit to anyone, which said everything about how much she needed this evening to be what it felt like it was going to be. She needed him to look at her across a table and say something real. She needed the night to confirm what she had been telling herself for 14 months, that the distance, the long silences, the way he sometimes looked at her in rooms full of his colleagues as if running a quiet calculation, all of that had been the pressure of the project, not the temperature of the relationship. She wore a black dress. The one he had told her made her look like she owned every room she walked into. He took her to the rooftop. Not a restaurant, not anywhere with music or other people. The rooftop terrace of the Xinhua building itself, 42 floors above the city she had spent 14 months helping him conquer. And the wind up there was the kind of October wind that finds every gap in your clothing and reminds you the season has already made its decision. She stood at the railing and looked out at Seoul, the Han River, a dark ribbon through the lights, the other towers rising around them like witnesses, and for 30 seconds she thought it was romantic. She thought he had brought her to stand on top of something they had built together. Junho stood with his back to the skyline, hands in his pockets, face arranged in the expression of a man who has made a decision and rehearsed its delivery and is now simply executing it. He told her their relationship had reached its natural end. He used the phrase cultural incompatibility like it was a line item in a quarterly report. He mentioned the IPO. He said the word image 4 times and her name 0 times. And when he was finished, he looked somewhere slightly past her left shoulder, the way people look when they have already emotionally vacated a room while their body is still in it. Kaya stood in the October wind in the black dress and felt something inside her go completely still. Not broken, not the hot collapse she might have expected. Something colder and more structural. The silence a building makes in the seconds after an impact, before anyone knows yet whether it will hold. She asked him one question. Was any of it real? Junho straightened his tie and told her the car downstairs would take her wherever she needed to go. She walked back through the building with her spine straight and her face arranged in the neutrality she had learned to wear since she was 17, in rooms that were waiting for her to fall apart. She collected her portfolio case from the lobby. She nodded at the security guard who had seen her arrive and leave this building 100 times over 14 months. She pushed through the glass doors and stepped onto the pavement and breathed. The city moved around her with the magnificent indifference of something that has been absorbing human catastrophe for centuries and has learned not to pause for any individual instance of it. She made it 11 steps. The sedans appeared from both ends of the street, 3 of them, moving with a coordination that could only have been rehearsed. The middle car stopped first, and the man who stepped out wore a charcoal suit and had the face of someone who delivers information professionally. Not cold, not warm, simply accurate. He looked at her and said her full name, first name, surname, and the Yoruba middle name her grandmother had given her that she had never once explained to Junho. The name that meant one who survives what was meant to destroy her. He said every syllable correctly. Then he held the door open and waited. Kaya looked back at the building. She thought about the car Junho had offered her and understood, with the sudden clarity that arrives when all the comfortable illusions are gone at once, that there was no ordinary version of this night left. The ordinary version had ended on the rooftop. She got in. She counted the drive. 23 minutes, 11 turns, 1 gate that opened before the car slowed and closed behind them with the permanence of a full stop. The grounds beyond the gate were nothing like the city she had just left. Gardens maintained with a level of attention that goes beyond money into conviction. A main building that combined traditional Korean rooflines with a structural modernity that Kaya clocked with professional appreciation before she could stop herself. Whoever had designed this understood something about the relationship between permanence and restraint that most architects spend entire careers trying to articulate. Chairman Kang Hyun-woo was already seated when they brought her in, mid-50s, lean with the leanness of discipline, a stillness about him that was not passivity but precision, the quality of someone for whom stillness is a practiced instrument. The table was set for 2, tea already poured, both cups, same temperature. He gestured to the chair across from him with the economy of a man who does not waste motion on anything that does not serve a purpose. He let her sit. He let her breathe. He poured nothing into her cup that he had not poured into his own first. Then he told her everything. Junho had been gambling for 2 years. Not casually, the kind that builds in silence, in private rooms, in the margins of a life that looks successful from the outside. The debt had reached $5 million. And Junho, faced with the arithmetic of his own destruction, had made a series of decisions that each seemed rational in isolation and were catastrophic in totality. He had signed over her intellectual property, every blueprint, every design file, every structural solution she had arrived at through years of training and sleepless nights. Junho had listed them as his assets, and he had guaranteed her removal. The agreement used careful, deniable language. Removal from the situation, return to country of origin, but the meaning, in the room where it was signed, was not ambiguous. He had promised she would disappear. Kaya sat with that the way you sit with something that has not just broken your heart, but restructured your entire understanding of the past 3 years. Every memory rearranging itself. Every kindness wears a different face now in this new light. When she finally spoke, her voice came from somewhere below the grief, from the structural level. She asked him why he was telling her, instead of simply using what Junho had handed him. Kang set down his tea. He told her he had not built what he built by accepting fraudulent transactions. Junho had sold him something that was never his to sell. That made the agreement void. And it made Kaya a wronged party who deserved to understand the exact nature of how she had been wronged. Then he told her he had a proposition. Anyone watching this right now who hasn't subscribed yet is making the same mistake Junho made, underestimating what's being built right in front of them. The suite they showed her to had a window facing the garden and beyond the garden walls, the distant glittering outline of the city that had just tried to swallow her. The wardrobe held clothes in her exact size. The desk was positioned to catch indirect light without glare, at the angle she had always preferred to work. Beside it sat a complete set of architectural drafting tools, still in their original packaging, with a zero point 0.5 mechanical pencil placed on top. She stood in the middle of that room for a long time. Someone had known she was coming before she had known herself. In the morning, Kang laid out his proposition with the directness she was beginning to understand was not coldness, but respect. He had rivals operating through legitimate firms who were extracting money from his investments through falsified contracts and structural specifications that met minimum legal requirements while quietly compromising the integrity of the buildings. His analysts had been trying to map the full network for 2 years. The falsification happened at the technical level, in the gap between what a blueprint said and what the actual physics required. A gap that was only visible to someone who understood both the documents and the engineering behind them. He needed her specific kind of intelligence. He had watched her career for 4 years. The Meridian Complex in Atlanta, the Adeola Housing Initiative in Lagos, the Xinhua Tower, which he knew was hers regardless of whose name would appear on the submission. In exchange, he was offering full professional credit, full protection, and a position that would make Junho's partnership look like a footnote in a longer story Junho was no longer going to be part of. Kaya listened without interrupting. Then she told him her condition. Whatever she found, whatever financial exposure, whatever evidence, whatever leverage her work uncovered, the decisions about how it was used would be hers. She had spent 3 years being someone else's asset without her knowledge. She was not entering another arrangement that treated her output as a resource to be deployed by someone else's judgment. She was the judge. Kang looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone receiving confirmation of a hypothesis they had held for some time. He extended his hand. She shook it. The 3 weeks that followed were the most clarifying of her professional life. She worked at that desk with the window light falling right, and she pulled contracts and cross-referenced specifications and ran load calculations that most structural engineers would have needed a team to complete. She found the first discrepancy on day 4. Daishin Construction's foundation specifications for a Yongsan complex read correctly at the document level, but referenced a concrete grade that would reach critical fatigue stress in 9 to 11 years. Not immediately dangerous, not immediately visible, the kind of failure designed to happen on someone else's watch. She flagged it and moved to the next file. By the end of the second week, she had mapped a procurement network connecting 4 construction firms to a single broker who had been shaving percentages off every contract for 4 years, distributing the proceeds through shell accounts thin enough that she almost missed it. Almost. She presented her findings to Kang on a Tuesday evening and watched him read every page. He asked 2 questions, both precise. Then he looked up and told her she had done in 3 weeks what his people had been unable to do in 2 years. She told him she wanted to go to the Lux Gallery opening on Friday. He raised an eyebrow. She explained. Junho would be there with his new fiancée. The people in that room had been given a particular version of events. She wanted to introduce a different version. Not through confrontation, not through drama, simply through presence. Kang considered this for 4 seconds. Then he told her to choose something to wear. The Lux Gallery in Gangnam was the kind of event that functioned as a social audit for Seoul's elite. People went to be seen and assessed and repositioned, and the art on the walls was secondary to the information in the room. Junho arrived at 8:30 with Minji on his arm, wearing the expression of a man who believes the narrative is fully under his control. She was composed and carefully positioned, her family's alignment with the IPO visible in the way she held herself. Junho worked the room with the ease of someone who had convinced himself the story was already written. Kaya arrived at 9:15 in deep burgundy. The gown had architectural lines, structured, deliberate, each seam a decision. She moved in it the way she moved in everything, with the confidence of someone who has earned it in rooms that required more than she should have had to give. Chairman Kang walked beside her with his hands easily at his sides and the absolute authority of a man who stopped needing external validation a long time ago. The room's awareness shifted, not all at once, in a cascade, a pause in one conversation, a trailing sentence in another, a champagne glass held mid-air, until the new information had touched every corner of the space and the room had adjusted around it. Minji felt it before Junho did. She touched his arm with 2 fingers. He followed her gaze across the room. The color left his face. Not just the color, the entire architecture of the evening, as he had planned it. The fiancé, the positioning, the narrative of the clean transition, all of it stood exposed in an instant as the scaffolding it had always been, and the building underneath had just been shown to have a problem with its foundation. Kaya greeted the curator by name, accepted champagne, paused in front of a sculptural installation near the east wall, and tilted her head at it with genuine consideration, because she could not fully turn off the part of her that reads objects for their underlying logic. She let the room watch her be unbothered, which was the most devastating thing she could have done, because unbothered meant she had somewhere better to be and had chosen to be here anyway. When she finally let her gaze find Junho across the room, she held it for 3 seconds. Not angry, not triumphant, just clear. The look of a woman who has finished processing a chapter and turned the page. Then she said something quiet to Kang, and he tilted his head in a way that wasn't quite a smile, and she did not look at Junho again. By the time the gallery closed, Seoul had quietly recalibrated. The IPO season Junho had planned to launch with this evening as its opening statement had instead begun with a question mark that no press release was going to answer. Drop a comment right now. Just the word burgundy, if you understood exactly what Kaya just did in that room. The people watching this closely are the ones who will see what's coming next. 72 hours after the gallery, Kaya found the blueprints. She was deep in the Daishin audit when a file reference number stopped her hand mid-motion. She knew that number. She had created it herself 14 months ago as part of the internal filing system she had built for the Xinhua Tower. It belonged to a set of preliminary foundation drawings. Early stage work, exploratory, the kind an architect produces while searching for the right answer before she has found it. She had marked them clearly as structurally insufficient, noted the specific problem, corrected it, and filed the preliminary drawings as superseded. They were sitting inside an active Xinhua construction contract. She pulled the full file slowly, the way you pull something when part of you already knows what you are going to find. The drawings were unmistakably hers, her notations, her scale conventions, her particular way of annotating load assumptions. But they were the wrong version. The one with the load distribution error in the East Foundation column that she had caught and corrected before anyone else had ever seen the page. The East column was already poured. She sat at that desk and let the full architecture of what she was looking at assemble itself. Junho had not just stolen her work, he had stolen the wrong version of her work. Because the wrong version was cheaper to build, because somewhere in the budget revision process, someone had found the preliminary drawings and seen the cost saving and made a decision without understanding or caring about why those drawings had been replaced. The Xinhua Tower was going to fail, not immediately, not visibly. In 5 to 8 years under full occupancy load, the east column would begin to show stress concentrations that no maintenance program would be able to address because the problem was in the foundation, which meant the problem was permanent. And the building was going to be full of people, hundreds of them, thousands over its lifetime. People who would walk into that lobby and ride those elevators and trust the ground beneath their feet the way people always trust structures. Completely. Without question. Because why would anyone build a building they knew was wrong? Kaya sat with the full weight of that for a long time. Then she opened a new project folder, named it with the precision she brought to everything she built, and began to construct the most important document of her career. Not a blueprint this time. A case. Build the way you build anything meant to last. Foundation first, every load path documented, every potential failure point identified and reinforced before the structure went up. She worked for 4 consecutive days. She brought in Dr. Park Soo-yeon, an independent structural engineer with 28 years of unimpeachable professional history, who visited the site at night, ran her tests, photographed everything, and confirmed what Kaya's calculations had already shown. The as-built condition matched the preliminary drawings exactly. No field correction, no modification. The column had been poured precisely according to the error, and the building rising above it did not know yet what was waiting for it at the foundation. She brought in Choi Byung-hoon, a lawyer who had successfully prosecuted 3 major construction fraud cases and who read her documentation with the focused silence of someone deciding whether to be impressed or concerned, and settled on both. He told her the case was strong, criminal exposure beyond civil liability. Intellectual property theft is documented thoroughly enough that no amount of corporate legal pressure would make it disappear. He asked her how she wanted to proceed. She told him the sequence: the structural report to the construction authority first, triggering a formal inspection, the intellectual property filing simultaneously, and before any of it became public, a conversation with Junho, not to warn him, not to give him an exit. She wanted to look at him when he understood the full dimensions of what was coming, because she had spent 3 years being invisible in his life while being central to it, and she wanted once to be seen clearly by him. To close that account honestly, because she was someone who believed things should be built correctly, and an ending built on anything less than full clarity was structurally incomplete. Choi told her that was her decision to make. She called Junho on a Sunday and told him to meet her at the site Monday morning before the crew arrived. She said nothing else. He came, afraid people always come when summoned, because the alternative is waiting alone for something to arrive that, at least in the presence of the person holding it, can be faced. The site at dawn was still and cold, the skeleton of the tower casting long shadows across the ground level where they stood. Kaya was already there when he arrived, standing near the east column, coat buttoned against the morning air, phone recording from the moment he stepped through the entrance. She let him speak first. He apologized with the vocabulary of a man who understands he has done something wrong and hopes the acknowledgement will function as partial payment. He used words like complicated and pressure and not who I want to be, which are the words of someone who has mistaken explanation for accountability. She let him finish. Then she walked him to the east column and explained it to him, not with anger, with the plain, clear precision she used when she needed someone without technical training to understand something technical. She explained what the column was supposed to be and what it was. She explained what would happen and when and to whom. She watched his face as the understanding moved through it. Not the abstract understanding of a man whose career might be in trouble, but the concrete understanding of a man being told about specific physical consequences of a specific decision he had made, measured in years and loads, and the weight of people trusting a building to hold them. She watched him understand that he had not just committed fraud, he had endangered lives. The silence that followed was the longest she had ever stood inside. He looked at the column, at her, at the column again. Then he said everything: the debt, the timeline, the decision to use the preliminary drawings, the names of the people who had known, the procurement officer who had approved the substitution. He said it all in the rambling release of someone who has been carrying something very heavy and has finally been given permission to put it down. Her phone recorded every word. When he finished, she looked at him for a long moment with no anger and no satisfaction, just the clear, quiet regard of someone assessing whether a thing they have built is complete. She told him she was filing the documentation today, the structural report to the construction authority that morning, the intellectual property case that afternoon, the recording to the criminal investigators as supplementary evidence. She told him she had not done this to destroy him. She had done it because the building was not safe, because the truth had to go somewhere, because she was the one who had built the evidence, and she was the one who got to decide what happened with it, and what needed to happen with it was that it needed to reach the people whose job it was to act on it. Junho stood at the base of his tower and said nothing. Kaya walked off the site without looking back. The channel keeps going because of the people who stay until the end of every story. If you made it here, subscribe and leave a comment telling us whose side you were on from the moment the sedans appeared, because the people in this community already know what Kaya knew from the very beginning. Minji requested the meeting through mutual contact, framing it as two women clearing the air. Kaya read that framing the way she read everything, for what it was not saying, for the weight it was carrying underneath the presentation. And she accepted because declining would have told Minji more than accepting ever could. They met at a private dining room in Apgujeong on a Tuesday afternoon. Minji was already seated when Kaya arrived. Small power move, noted. She was composed in the way of someone who had prepared thoroughly, and she had placed a document case on the table between them with the deliberate positioning of someone who wanted it visible but not yet explained. She offered Kaya $12 million. No preamble, no pretense. 12 million, transferred anywhere Kaya designated, in exchange for withdrawing all intellectual property claims, relocating permanently outside South Korea, and maintaining silence regarding her relationship with Xinhua, with Junho, and this was the detail that told Kaya exactly how much Minji actually knew, with Chairman Kang. Kaya looked at the document case. She looked at Minji. She said no. Minji absorbed this without visible reaction, which confirmed the revised assessment Kaya had already made. This was not a woman surprised by refusal. This was a woman who had built a contingency before she had finished presenting the original offer. She closed the document case with the measured motion of someone changing gears rather than losing ground, and told Kaya she hoped she would reconsider, because the alternative would be uncomfortable for everyone involved. Kaya told her she appreciated the clarity, stood, left. In the car, she called Choi Byung-hoon and told him to accelerate everything. What Minji did next was not stupidity. It was a calculation built on wrong assumptions, which is its own particular kind of danger. She had read Kaya as a social figure in Kang's world. A presence, a symbol, influential but not operational. She had not considered that Kaya had spent 6 weeks building herself into the actual load-bearing structure of the organization, which gave her access that a purely decorative figure would never have had. That miscalculation was going to cost the Huang family everything. Minji filed a report with the Cultural Property Crimes Unit 3 days after the meeting. The allegation was that Kaya had stolen a Goryeo dynasty ceramic from a private collector's storage facility, a piece valued at 800 million won. The evidence package was professionally assembled. A security log placing Kaya's name in the visitor record, a financial transaction suggesting an overseas sale, a witness statement from a facility employee who claimed to have seen a woman matching her description in a restricted area on the relevant date. The problem was the date. Kaya had been at Kang's estate the entire evening in question. A meeting, 6 attendees, security footage that was time-stamped, continuous, and stored on a server that had never been altered. 48 hours after the allegation was filed, Choi Byung-hoon submitted a formal response that included the verified footage, a technical analysis showing the visitor log entry had been created retroactively. The metadata made that embarrassingly clear to anyone who knew how to read it, and a cross-reference between the timeline of the allegation's construction and a set of communications between Minji's personal assistant and the storage facility's management. The counterfiling named Minji Huang directly. It named her father's construction supply company in relation to 3 procurement contracts connected to the same Dacian network Kaya had already documented. It named the facility manager who had generated the false log and provided evidence of the payment he had received to do it. By Thursday morning, the Huang family's legal team had stopped thinking about Kaya entirely. The criminal investigation into the Huang family's procurement arrangements opened on a Friday. Minji's father retained 4 lawyers within 24 hours. The Xinhua IPO timeline went under immediate review, and Junho, whose entire future had been structurally dependent on the Huang family alignment, stood watching the foundation of his new arrangement develop the same quiet, invisible cracks sitting in the east column of his tower. He called Kaya's phone on Saturday morning. She did not answer. She was at her desk with the window open and the November air coming in, looking at the 5th section of her document, thinking about sequence, thinking about the building, thinking about how to build an ending that was correct rather than just satisfying. She had always known there was a difference between those two things. Anyone who's ever been offered money to disappear and said no anyway, "This comment section is yours. Drop it." Kaya said what she said. The first real sign that something was shifting inside Kang's organization arrived from a direction Kaya had been monitoring but had not expected to accelerate this quickly. Wu Taijin had been Kang's lead captain for 15 years. 15 years of operational loyalty, running the daily mechanics of an organization that required a specific combination of precision and discretion that most people could not sustain for 15 months. He was efficient, trusted. He had understood his position in the hierarchy with the settled confidence of a man who has never had cause to question it. Kaya's arrival had given him cause. She had felt it before she could articulate it, the way you detect a structural stress before it becomes visible. through small signs that mean nothing individually and everything together. The half-beat delay in his responses to her requests. Information arriving at her desk is slightly altered. Not wrong, not obviously wrong, but shaped. The way information gets shaped when it passes through someone making quiet decisions about what to include. The look he gave her in the corridor outside Kang's study one evening that lasted 1 second longer than professional neutrality allowed. She cataloged it all without reaction, without confrontation, with the patience of someone building a complete picture before deciding what to do with it. She was also watching Kang. His health was changing, subtly in ways invisible to anyone without a calibrated sense of his baseline. He was eating less. The stillness that had always been a practiced instrument had become occasionally effortful, as if maintaining it now required energy that had previously been available for other things. On the one occasion she raised it directly, he dismissed it with the ease of a man who has been dismissing concern about himself for decades. She did not press it. Pressing would cost more than it would return, but she watched. And she thought about what her grandmother in Lagos used to call Sanjio, sharks. Not the ocean kind. The room is kind. The ones that move when they sense the balance shifting, slow at first, repositioning, recalculating, then terrifyingly fast once they have decided the moment has arrived. Wu was moving. She could see the calculations happening behind his professional compliance. She could see, because she was embedded deeply enough now to read the organization's internal dynamics, that he was not moving alone. Two others, men whose names and functions she had mapped, had been in his orbit with a frequency that had stopped looking coincidental at least 2 weeks ago. She did not yet know the exact shape of what they were building. She knew they were building something. She kept working. She kept delivering. She made herself visible and specific in every briefing she attended, because visibility and specificity are harder to move against than diffuse influence. She built her value into the organization's operations the same way she built redundancy into load-bearing structures, quietly, thoroughly, in a way that would be felt immediately upon removal. Then she found the communication between Wu and Junho. It had been routed through 3 intermediaries, which meant someone had taken precautions, which meant someone understood there was something to take precautions against, which meant the planning had been running longer than the surface signs had shown. She sat with the full shape of it for an evening. Kang's health declining on one side, Wu repositioning on the other, Junho's desperation making him willing to form alliances he would never have considered from a position of strength, and herself standing in the center of all of it, with a case file almost ready and a clock running on multiple timers at once. She was surrounded, not trapped. She was precise about the difference. Trapped meant no exit. Surrounded meant she needed to be smarter about the order of her moves. She went to Kang that night. She found him in the small study at the back of the building that looked over the garden, where he sat sometimes in the evenings with tea going cold beside him and nothing in his hands. She sat across from him without waiting to be invited. She placed what she had found on the table between them. He read it. His stillness deepened. That particular shift she had learned to recognize as real processing, rather than routine assessment. He looked at the documentation of Wu's contact with Junho. He looked at the timeline. He looked at her. He told her she had done well to find it. She told him finding it was the easy part. She told him she had a proposal. She told him that Wu had built his plan around 2 targets. That the way to dismantle the plan was to change the arithmetic before Wu realized the arithmetic had changed. And the way to change the arithmetic was for her to stop being a consultant and become something that could not be moved against without moving against the entire organization. Kang asked her if she understood what she was proposing. She told him she understood exactly what she was proposing. She had spent 6 weeks studying the organization's load path the way she studied buildings, identifying where the weight was actually carried, where the single points of failure lived, and where the work of modernization was most urgently needed. She was not proposing a takeover. She was proposing a renovation, the kind that strengthens the foundation before anyone touches the facade. Kang was quiet for a long moment. Then he said that he had been waiting for her to arrive at this conversation since approximately the 3rd week. If Wu had known what was being discussed in that room while he was making his plans, he would have moved faster. He didn't know. That was the thing about underestimating people. It always narrows your peripheral vision at exactly the moment you need it most. What followed happened in two tracks simultaneously, which was the only way it could have worked. On the first track, Kaya moved through the organization with a new authority that was not announced but was immediately understood. Because in structures of this kind, authority announced is authority that can be contested, while authority demonstrated has already arrived. She restructured the logistics of three separate asset streams, moving them from the construction sector, which was about to become a deeply uncomfortable place for anyone adjacent to it, into technology investment positions that were clean, legitimate, and positioned for growth that made the previous arrangements look reckless. She was methodical. She was fast. She was precise in the way she was always precise when the work actually mattered. And the people inside the organization who had been watching her with careful neutrality began, one by one, to make the same quiet recalibration the Lux Gallery Room had made weeks earlier. On the second track, she arranged the meeting with Junho. She chose the construction site again. She had unfinished business there. She told him to come Monday morning before the crew arrived and said nothing else. He came. He looked like a man who had been fighting on too many fronts for too long and was beginning to understand the mathematics of that situation. The polish was still there, the quality suit, the careful grooming, but underneath it was an exhaustion that the polish could no longer fully cover. He told her he needed her back. She let him say the whole shape of it, the version he had constructed in which returning to his side was a reasonable proposition. He talked about the IPO complications, the Huang investigation, the shifting ground under everything he had built. He talked about her in terms that, in a different life, she might have found moving. Her intelligence, her vision, what they had been together. Her phone was recording from the moment he had stepped through the entrance. When he finished, she asked him one question. She asked him to tell her, clearly and completely, exactly what he had signed and what he had promised and what he had expected to happen to her. She asked it in the tone of someone requesting a technical clarification. Neutral, professional. The tone of someone who needs accuracy because accuracy matters. He told her everything. The debt, the signing, the names of the people in the room when the agreement was made, the moment he had told himself it was manageable, the moment he had known it wasn't and moved forward anyway. He said all of it in the particular release of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been given permission to put it down. Her phone recorded every word. When he finished, she told him the documentation had already been filed. The structural report was with the Seoul Construction Authority. The intellectual property case was in civil court. The recording of this conversation was going to the criminal investigators as supplementary evidence. She told him she was sorry it had ended this way. She meant it. Not because she regretted what she was doing. She was certain about what she was doing down to the bone. But she had once loved him, or had loved the version of him she had believed existed. And the distance between that person and the person standing in front of her in the cold morning light was the saddest structure she had ever been asked to assess. Junho walked off the site without speaking. She stood at the east column for a moment after he left. She placed one hand flat against the concrete, cold, solid, certain of itself in a way that the structural reality inside it did not support. And she let herself feel the full weight of that for exactly as long as it needed. Then she took her hand away and walked in the opposite direction. Pause with Kaya for just a second, because this is the moment where she chose the building over the betrayal. And if you understand why that matters, this channel was made for you. Subscribe. You're exactly who this story was built for. Wu moved 3 days later, earlier than she had anticipated, which told her his information about the filings had reached him faster than she had accounted for. He arrived at the estate on a Wednesday evening with the two men from his orbit and a set of legal documents challenging Kang's operational authority within the organization's holding structure. A formal move through the legitimate corporate architecture, carefully prepared, built for exactly this kind of moment. He presented them to Kang in the main receiving room. Kang read them without expression. Then he looked up and asked Kaya, standing to his left, what she thought. The recalibration that moved through Wu's face in that moment, the recognition that the geometry of the room was not what he had walked into it expecting, was the face of a man whose arithmetic had just changed in front of him, and who was trying to determine how fast and how badly. Kaya told Kang the documents were well constructed, but contained a structural flaw in the third section, a dependency on an authorization clause that had been superseded by an operational restructuring she had completed and legally registered the previous week. The challenge had been built against an architecture that no longer existed. She placed the counter documentation on the table. Wu looked at the documents, at Kaya, at Kang, who had the expression of a man watching something he had anticipated and arranged to have handled without requiring his direct participation. Wu left the estate that evening. He did not return. The two men from his orbit were reassigned within 48 hours to positions geographically and operationally distant from anything that mattered. Sharks, Kaya had learned from her grandmother, do not require dramatic confrontation. They require the removal of the conditions that made the water hospitable. The Seoul Construction Authority issued a stop work order on the Xinhua Tower that Thursday morning. Issued quietly through official channels in the language of bureaucratic process, which was the most devastating possible language for a company in the middle of IPO preparation. By Friday afternoon, it had been reported by 3 financial news outlets. By Saturday morning, it was the first result on every search of the company's name. Junho's lawyers attempted 4 interventions over the following week. Each one ran directly into the documentation Choi Byung-hun had built around Kaya's evidence, which had been structured specifically to survive exactly these attempts. It was held under pressure in direct proportion to the care taken in its construction. That was the thing about work done correctly. It held. The grand opening of the Xinhua Tower had been in planning for 8 months. Embossed invitations delivered by courier. 300 guests from Seoul's architectural, financial, and political establishment. 2 national broadcast cameras. An Architectural Excellence Award from the Seoul Development Board, to be presented on stage to the man whose vision had produced the building. Junho had fought to keep the event on schedule despite the stop work order, which had been conditionally lifted pending the outcome of the structural assessment, a condition his legal team had managed to keep technically ambiguous enough to allow the opening to proceed while the assessment remained in process. He needed the opening. He needed to stand on that stage and have the cameras capture him in front of the building that represented, in the official story, his vision and his leadership and his arrival as one of Seoul's defining figures. He needed that image to exist before everything else did. He needed it badly enough to proceed when a person thinking clearly would have canceled. Kaya had counted on exactly that. The atrium of the Xinhua Tower was spectacular in the way Junho's ambitions had always been spectacular. High ceilings, dramatic lighting, the kind of space designed to make every person inside it feel they are present at something significant. 4 massive digital screens dominated the walls, an architectural feature of the atrium itself, displaying a curated presentation of the building's development, renders, construction milestones, the visual story of the tower's ascent. Junho delivered the first 4 minutes and 30 seconds of his speech with the assurance of a man who has convinced himself the story is still his to tell. He was polished. He was present. He was, for those 4 minutes and 30 seconds, exactly the person he had spent 3 years trying to become. Then the screens went dark. 2 seconds of silence. Then the screens displayed a document. The first page of Dr. Park Soo-yeon's structural assessment, co-authored with Kaya's own analysis, detailing the east column load distribution error, the preliminary drawings used in place of the corrected specifications, the projected failure timeline, and the names of the people who had known. Below that, the intellectual property filing showing original authorship of the Xinhua Tower blueprints with time-stamped evidence. Below that, a formatted transcript of Junho's recorded confession at the construction site, the most material sections highlighted in clean, readable text. At the bottom of the final screen, in plain sans serif ghost clause, structural deficiency knowingly concealed from regulatory authority. 300 people, 2 broadcast cameras, the Seoul Development Board chairman, all the press. The room did not erupt. It went silent in the way rooms go silent when the people in them need to suspend all social performance in order to process what they are seeing. For a moment there was nothing. Just the screens, just the documents, just the recorded voice of Junho Lim explaining in his own words exactly what he had done and why. Then the sound came back all at once, and it was nothing like applause. Jun-ho stood at the podium and did not move. He stood the way the Xinhua Tower was standing, upright, apparently intact, while the thing that was supposed to be holding it up was failing in a place no one could see from the outside. The Seoul Development Board chairman moved first, stepping toward the building authority representative, who was already on his phone. The broadcasters kept their cameras running because this was, regardless of everything else, history. Junho's lawyer arrived at his elbow within 90 seconds, which meant the lawyer had been in the room, which meant Junho had known something might happen and had prepared for it, which meant he had come anyway, because the alternative was worse. The handcuffs came 40 minutes later. Not in the atrium, in the administrative corridor, with 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit and 1 from the Construction Authority, with Junho's lawyer present and Junho himself quiet, in the way people go quiet when the last door has closed and there is nothing left to perform for. Kaya was not in the building when it happened. She had been there earlier, had walked through the empty atrium before the guests arrived, had stood at the east column one final time, had looked up at the structure she had designed and the structure that had been built in its place, and had sat with the distance between those two things for exactly as long as it deserved. Then she had placed the evidence in the hands of the people whose job it was to act on it, and she had stepped back, because built things stand or fall on their own merits, and her work here was done. She watched the opening on a live feed from a car parked on the street outside, window down, November air coming in. She watched the screens go dark. She watched the documents appear. She watched the room's silence spread across the broadcast frame like a current moving through water. She closed the feed. She told the driver to take her back to the estate. Kang was in the garden when she arrived, standing near the stone wall at the far end, looking at it with the expression he wore when he was thinking about something he had not yet decided how to say. His coat was heavier than last week's. She noted it without commenting. She stood beside him. The garden was quiet. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city was digesting what had just happened to one of its ambitious sons. He told her the ring belonged to his father. He said it without preamble, in the way he said things that mattered, and she understood without needing it, explained that this was not casual history. He turned it on his finger, a habit she had noticed before, but never heard him acknowledge. And he talked about his father in the brief, precise way of someone who made his peace with a complicated inheritance a long time ago. The organization, the weight of it, what it had cost to build and what it had required to sustain and what it had prevented in ways the official record would never reflect. He told her he had been thinking about what came after, not abstractly, as a timeline. More concretely in recent months, he said, which was the first time he had acknowledged, in any form, what she had been watching without comment. He told her the organization needed to keep changing, that the work she had begun, the technology repositioning, the structural modernization, the building of legitimate architecture that could survive scrutiny, needed to continue with someone who understood both the work and the organization, someone who could hold the legitimacy and the history simultaneously, the future and the foundation. He took the ring off his finger. He placed it in her hand. He told her he was stepping back, not disappearing, into the shadows he had always preferred, where he could remain a presence without being a target, where the work could continue without requiring him to be its visible face. Kaya looked at the ring in her palm. It was heavier than it looked. Signet rings always were. She looked at him and told him she had one condition. He tilted his head in the way that was not quite a smile, because it was the same thing she had said to him on the morning she had agreed to stay, at the table with the tea and the cold October light, and the consistency of it appeared to mean something to him. She told him the organization was going to be clean, not sanitized. She was not naive about what had built it, or what traces of its history would remain in its bones, the way histories always remain in bones. But going forward, every decision made inside it was going to be one she could stand behind, built correctly, no shortcuts taken in the dark. He told her that was exactly why he was giving her the ring. She closed her fingers around it. She walked back through the estate and up to the second floor and stood at the window of the room she had first been shown to on the night she arrived, with nothing except a portfolio case and the ruins of 3 years, and a name she had not expected to be pronounced correctly. Seoul spread out beyond the garden walls, lit from within, layered and indifferent and completely continuous. The city that does not pause, that does not mark individual moments of reckoning, that simply keeps moving through every story that plays out inside it as if each one is both significant and ordinary, which is the truest thing about cities and perhaps the truest thing about survival. Somewhere in Yongsan, a tower stood with a condemned notice going up on its facade, its grand opening atrium emptied, its screens dark, its architectural excellence award sitting on a stage no one had collected it from. Somewhere in a police vehicle, Jun-Ho Lim was riding toward the first night of the rest of his life. It was going to be a long time. It was going to look nothing like the future he had designed. And here at this window, with a ring in her hand that was heavier than it looked, Kaya stood and looked at the skyline she had spent her entire career learning to read. All the buildings, every one of them a set of decisions about what would hold and what would not, about what was worth the cost of doing correctly. And she understood with the quiet certainty of someone who has come through something that was specifically designed to end her, that the city was not finished with her. She was not finished with it. She had buildings left to design, real ones this time, with her name on them. Structures that would stand because they had been built by someone who understood that you cannot raise anything permanent on a foundation you compromised in the dark. That every shortcut surfaces eventually. That the most powerful thing a woman can be in a city that tried to erase her is exactly, completely, and without apology herself. The ring caught the light from the window. She put it on. This story was built word by word because of people who stayed until the last line. If that's you, subscribe and drop "She Owns the Skyline" in the comments, because the viewers who make it to this moment are the reason this channel exists, and Kaya would want you to know she sees every single one of you.